In a world where global powers clash and the stakes couldn't be higher, the US-Iran conflict has exploded into a high-stakes showdown that's shaking markets, testing alliances, and rewriting the rules of modern warfare. From secret back-channel pleas to defiant rejections and escalating threats, this is the inside story of how a planned quick strike turned into a potential quagmire. Buckle up as we dive into the dramatic twists that have left Washington scrambling and Tehran standing firm. The sequence of events unfolded with startling speed in the opening days of what Washington had privately described as a tightly scripted military operation against Iran. Trump pushes immediate ceasefire via Italian mediator. Iran rejects outright within hours. The sequence of events unfolded with startling speed in the opening days of what Washington had privately described as a tightly scripted military operation against Iran. According to senior Israeli security officials speaking on condition of anonymity and corroborated by two separate Gulf-based diplomatic channels, President Donald Trump authorized an urgent back-channel communication to Tehran less than 72 hours after the first wave of joint U.S.-Israeli airstrikes struck high-value targets inside Iranian territory. The chosen conduit was Rome. Italy's foreign ministry, leveraging long-standing ties with both sides that date back to nuclear negotiations in the mid-2010s, agreed to serve as the discreet intermediary. A senior Italian diplomat, whose identity remains closely guarded, personally delivered the American message to Iranian representatives in a closed-door session held at a neutral European capital, widely believed to be either Geneva or Vienna, on the evening of the third day of active combat operations. The proposal itself was stripped to its essentials: an immediate mutual halt to all offensive military actions, including the suspension of further U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, command and control nodes, and ballistic missile depots, in exchange for a parallel Iranian commitment to cease missile barrages against Israeli cities and U.S. naval assets in the Persian Gulf. The American side emphasized that the pause would be temporary but indefinite in duration, intended to create breathing room for renewed diplomatic talks under a format yet to be determined. Trump administration officials stressed privately that the offer was not framed as weakness, but as pragmatism. They had calculated that a rapid show of force, decapitation strikes against elements of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps leadership, and precision hits on uranium enrichment cascades would sufficiently shock Tehran into accepting a face-saving off-ramp before the conflict spiraled into a wider regional war. Yet the Iranian response arrived faster than almost anyone in Washington anticipated. Within roughly 4 hours of the Italian diplomat conveying the proposal, Tehran's reply reached Rome through the same channel. The message was curt, unambiguous, and delivered with unmistakable contempt. Iranian officials rejected the ceasefire overture in its entirety. They refused to entertain any discussion of a pause while Israeli and American warplanes remained active over Iranian airspace, and while Israeli special forces were reportedly conducting limited ground raids along the country's western border. Iran does not negotiate under bombardment, one senior figure in the foreign ministry told the Italian envoy, according to people familiar with the exchange. Another Iranian interlocutor reportedly added a pointed jab: "Tell Washington that begging does not become an empire." The language, though filtered through diplomatic translation, carried the unmistakable tone of dismissal. Laughter was not merely implied. Multiple sources confirmed that at least one member of the Iranian delegation audibly chuckled when the terms were first read aloud. The speed and tone of the rejection caught the White House off guard. Internal assessments prepared for the president in the preceding weeks had projected that Iran, facing what U.S. intelligence described as severe degradation of its air defense network and the loss of several mid-tier IRGC commanders, would seek de-escalation within the first week. Planners had even modeled scenarios in which Tehran might quietly signal willingness for a truce through Oman or Qatar, traditional back channels in past crises. Instead, the opposite occurred. Iranian state television broadcast images of undamaged missile launchers being repositioned under cover of night, while Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei appeared in a brief recorded address vowing that the Zionist enemy and its American patron will taste the full consequences of their arrogance. The public posture matched the private one. No retreat, no compromise, no timetable dictated by outsiders. Iran's foreign minister declares no ceasefire requests from Tehran, only continued resistance. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi stepped before cameras in Tehran the following morning, delivering what would become one of the defining statements of the conflict's early phase. Standing beneath a portrait of the late General Qasem Soleimani and flanked by the national flag, Araghchi spoke for 17 minutes without notes. His central message was calibrated for both domestic consumption and international audiences. Iran had neither requested nor would it ever request a ceasefire. The aggressor does not get to choose when the battle ends, he declared, his voice steady and deliberate. We are not the ones who started this war, and we are not the ones who will blink first. Araghchi directly addressed the rumored American outreach, though he never mentioned Italy by name. Certain capitals have been busy carrying messages from Washington, he said, pausing briefly for effect. Those messages have been received, studied, and rejected. There will be no pause in our defensive operations so long as the skies over our homeland remain violated and our people remain under threat. He went further, explicitly ruling out negotiations while military pressure continued. Talks under the shadow of bombs are not talks. They are capitulation dressed in diplomatic language, he asserted. The minister then pivoted to a warning that sent ripples through energy markets and defense ministries alike. Iran was fully prepared to respond to any further escalation, including the possibility of a U.S. decision to insert ground forces into the theater. Behind the rhetoric lay a calculated strategic posture. Iranian military planners had spent months gaming out exactly this scenario, a sudden, high-intensity American-Israeli campaign designed to cripple key capabilities in a matter of days. Doctrine developed since the 2020 assassination of Soleimani emphasized asymmetric endurance. Disperse assets, harden underground facilities, saturate borders with low-cost drones and missiles, and absorb initial losses while preserving the ability to strike back at depth. Araghchi's statement was the public articulation of that doctrine in action. He listed no concessions, offered no timeline for de-escalation, and closed with a phrase that would be repeated across Persian language media for days: the resistance continues until the occupation ends. The declaration landed amid a fresh wave of Iranian missile and drone attacks targeting Israeli air bases and energy infrastructure along the Gulf. Satellite imagery analyzed by independent defense institutes showed launch activity from at least 7 separate sites in western and central Iran, suggesting that command authority remained intact despite the earlier targeted killings. Araghchi's words, therefore, were not mere bravado. They reflected battlefield reality as Tehran perceived it. The foreign minister concluded his remarks by addressing the Iranian people directly. Patience, steadfastness, and faith in God will see us through. The enemy's impatience is our opportunity. In Washington, the twin blows, the lightning-fast rejection through Rome and Araghchi's televised refusal forced an abrupt recalibration. Within hours of the foreign minister's appearance, President Trump posted a series of messages on his social media platform, shifting the public line from de-escalation to dominance. Iran was given a chance to stop the killing and chose war instead, one read. Another followed minutes later. Unconditional surrender is now the only path. Anything less, and the full might of the United States will be brought to bear. The pivot was complete. What began as a search for a quick off-ramp had in less than a week hardened into a demand for total capitulation. U.S. officials expected quick 4 to 5 day operation. Now face prolonged war. After early de-escalation, bid fails. Senior Pentagon planners and White House national security staff had modeled the Iran campaign as a high-speed surgical strike. 4 to 5 days of overwhelming air and missile superiority would shatter key IRGC command nodes, cripple missile production, and force Tehran into negotiations before any meaningful counteroffensive could materialize. Intelligence briefings repeatedly described the operation as a short, sharp excursion designed to restore deterrence without boots on the ground or extended commitment. Optimism peaked in pre-strike assessments. Officials projected regime elites would fracture under the pressure of lost leadership and damaged nuclear sites, prompting back-channel pleas for a face-saving exit. Instead, the timeline collapsed almost immediately. By day 6, Iranian missile salvos continued unabated, targeting Israeli ports and U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria with barrages that demonstrated preserved launch capability. Satellite imagery revealed dispersed, hardened mobile units evading destruction, while underground facilities absorbed repeated hits without visible collapse. The early ceasefire outreach through Italy, intended as insurance for a rapid wind-down, met outright rejection, stripping away the assumed diplomatic off-ramp. What was sold internally as a controlled demonstration of force has morphed into open-ended attrition. Fuel prices spiked 18% in 48 hours. Gulf shipping insurers doubled war risk premiums, and allied capitals quietly pressed Washington for clarity on exit strategy. The administration now confronts the reality it sought to avoid. A resilient adversary willing to absorb punishment while methodically retaliating, turning a blitz into a grinding, unpredictable contest with no clear off switch in sight. Tehran laughs off surrender, demands unconditional surrender. Phrase, didn't work last year, won't work now. Iranian state media seized on President Trump's social media volley demanding unconditional surrender with a mix of ridicule and defiance. IRGC-affiliated outlets replayed clips of the president's posts alongside archival footage from 2025 Gaza and Lebanon escalations, where similar ultimatums failed to produce capitulation. A senior advisor to the supreme leader, speaking on Press TV, delivered the line that quickly went viral across Persian language platforms. Unconditional surrender didn't work last year, and it won't work now. The Americans keep recycling failed scripts. The comment drew audible laughter from the studio audience and was amplified by thousands of retweets and shares within minutes. Tehran framed the demand as evidence of strategic panic rather than strength. Foreign ministry spokespeople described it as the language of desperation from a superpower watching its blitz fizzle. Public messaging doubled down on endurance. Billboards in Tehran showed silhouettes of missile launchers captioned, "We decide the end, not them." Military commentators on state television mocked the phrase as Hollywood bravado, contrasting it with Iran's doctrine of prolonged resistance modeled on past asymmetric campaigns. The psychological riposte landed hard in Washington, where officials had hoped the surrender rhetoric would intimidate elites into fracturing. Instead, it unified public sentiment inside Iran, with even moderate voices on social media rejecting negotiations under threat. Energy analysts noted a fresh surge in Strait of Hormuz insurance costs as Tehran hinted at calibrated responses to any further escalation, signaling that the war's tempo and its conclusion remains firmly in Iranian hands. Trump pivots to no deal except unconditional surrender, after initial outreach rejected. Hours after Iran's swift dismissal of the Italy-mediated ceasefire proposal, President Trump shifted his public stance dramatically on Truth Social. What began as quiet diplomatic probing for a rapid pause transformed overnight into an uncompromising ultimatum. In a rapid-fire series of posts, the president declared, Iran was offered a way out. Total ceasefire, talks, rebuilding. They laughed. Now there will be no deal except unconditional surrender. Anything short of that and we finish what we started. The messages, time-stamped within a 20-minute window, marked a clear pivot from de-escalation signaling to total war rhetoric. Administration spokespeople quickly followed up, framing the demand as the only realistic path after Tehran's rejection proved the initial campaign's shock and awe phase had not broken Iranian resolve. Trump emphasized that surrender would open the door to a new Iran, free, prosperous without the mullahs, echoing language used in past calls for regime change. The shift drew immediate attention from energy traders and allied governments. Brent crude jumped another 7% as markets priced in prolonged disruption. Critics inside Washington noted the irony. A conflict sold internally as limited and swift now carried open-ended regime change language, usually reserved for existential threats. Iranian state media pounced, broadcasting the posts with sarcastic commentary dubbing them the tweet of a cornered bully. The president's tone left little room for ambiguity. Talks were off the table unless Tehran capitulated completely. A condition officials privately acknowledged was designed to be politically impossible for the current leadership to accept. Iran prepares for potential U.S. ground invasion, ready to counter any escalation. Iranian military commanders issued a series of coordinated statements signaling high readiness for scenarios far beyond the current air and missile exchanges. Defense Minister Brigadier General Aziz Nasirzadeh appeared on state television flanked by maps showing fortified coastal positions and mountain strongholds, stating bluntly, "We are fully prepared to confront any escalation, including the landing of American ground forces on our soil." He detailed recent drills simulating beachhead defenses along the Persian Gulf and Hormuz Strait, involving swarms of fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles, and thousands of IRGC Basij militia integrated into layered defenses. IRGC Aerospace Force Chief Amir Ali Hajizadeh followed with a rare briefing, displaying footage of underground missile galleries and mobile transporter erector launchers repositioned after surviving initial strikes. Our doctrine is clear. Absorb the first blow, then strike back at depth, bases, carriers, allies, he said. Officials emphasized dispersal of assets, hardened command bunkers, and pre-positioned supplies to sustain weeks or months of fighting. Foreign Minister Arakchi reinforced the message diplomatically, telling reporters, any attempt at occupation will meet the fate of every invader before them, prolonged, costly, and ultimately futile. Intelligence assessments shared with regional partners indicated Iran had quietly mobilized reserve units near key choke points while accelerating production of low-cost drones for saturation attacks. The posture appeared calibrated to deter rather than provoke ground intervention, yet it also signaled Tehran's confidence that it could turn any American boots-on-the-ground move into a quagmire reminiscent of past U.S. entanglements in the region. Behind-the-scenes panic. Reports claim Trump sought rapid truce days into strikes. Multiple Israeli and Gulf intelligence sources leaked details revealing deep unease inside the Trump administration as the Iran operation stretched beyond its planned window. What U.S. planners had billed as a decisive 4 to 5 day blitz, aimed at crippling nuclear sites, missile stocks, and IRGC leadership, hit unexpected resistance by day 4. Behind closed doors, senior officials reportedly grew alarmed at the volume and precision of Iranian counterstrikes hitting Israeli infrastructure and U.S. assets in the region. Leaked memos cited in regional media described urgent situation room discussions where the president pressed aides for an off-ramp, fearing oil price shocks and domestic political blowback from prolonged fighting. The Italian-mediated ceasefire pitch, delivered within 72 hours of the first bombs falling, stemmed directly from this anxiety. Sources say Trump authorized the outreach personally, hoping Tehran would seize the chance to declare a tactical pause and claim victory after absorbing initial losses. Instead, the rejection fueled internal finger-pointing. Some blamed overly optimistic CIA assessments of Iranian fragility. Others pointed to underestimation of Tehran's dispersed missile forces and proxy networks. Gulf diplomats privy to the back channel described White House staff as visibly rattled during follow-up calls, with one senior advisor quoted anonymously saying the early truce bid exposed a miscalculation of historic proportions. The panic leaked outward through allied channels, eroding confidence in the campaign's momentum and prompting quiet questions from European capitals about Washington's endgame. Publicly, the administration maintained resolve, but the behind-the-scenes scramble for de-escalation told a different story, one of a lightning war that refused to stay lightning. IRGC vows Iran, not Washington, will determine when and how the war ends. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders delivered a series of defiant broadcasts asserting total control over the conflict's timeline and terms. IRGC Chief Hossein Salami appeared on state television, flanked by maps highlighting surviving missile batteries and drone production lines, stating flatly, "The aggressors in Washington and Tel Aviv do not decide the duration or conclusion of this confrontation. We do." He emphasized Iran's strategy of calibrated escalation, absorbing strikes, preserving core capabilities, then retaliating at times and places of its choosing. "Every day they continue, we grow stronger in resolve and readiness," Salami declared, pointing to fresh satellite footage of repositioned launchers that evaded earlier U.S. and Israeli targeting. Other senior officers echoed the message across Persian and Arabic language outlets, framing the war as a test of endurance the Islamic Republic was built to win. One brigade commander, speaking from a forward position, said, "They thought we would collapse in days. Instead, we are dictating the rhythm." The rhetoric aligned with battlefield actions, sustained missile and drone volleys against Israeli military sites, disruptions to Gulf shipping lanes, and activation of proxy fronts in Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. Tehran's messaging rejected any externally imposed deadline, insisting that cessation of hostilities would occur only when aggressors ceased operations and accepted reality on the ground. IRGC spokespeople repeatedly highlighted preserved underground facilities, redundant command structures, and popular mobilization as proof that Iran held the initiative. The vow carried both strategic and psychological weight, signaling to domestic audiences that the leadership remained firmly in command while warning adversaries that attempts to force an outcome would prolong suffering on all sides. Early ceasefire hopes collapse as Iran rejects multiple U.S. proposals amid retaliatory strikes. U.S. diplomatic efforts to halt the fighting unraveled rapidly as Iran turned down at least 3 separate ceasefire overtures in the conflict's first week. The initial Italy-mediated pitch for an immediate mutual stand-down was followed by 2 additional feelers, one routed through Oman and another via a Gulf intermediary, each offering progressively narrower terms, but still centered on a pause in hostilities to allow talks. All were rebuffed within hours, with Iranian officials citing ongoing U.S. and Israeli airstrikes as proof that Washington lacked seriousness. Tehran insisted no meaningful dialogue could occur while bombs fell on military bases, nuclear-related sites, and civilian infrastructure in border provinces. Simultaneous with the rejections, Iran intensified retaliatory operations. Waves of ballistic missiles and Shahed drones targeted Israeli air defense batteries, Haifa port facilities, and U.S. logistics hubs in eastern Syria. Satellite imagery confirmed launches from previously unscathed sites in Kermanshah and Isfahan provinces, demonstrating that core strike capabilities survived the opening barrage. The pattern of rejection plus escalation shattered early American assumptions that visible damage would compel a climb down. Instead, each refusal hardened Iran's public line while its forces maintained operational tempo. Oil futures climbed steeply on fears of wider closure risks in the Strait of Hormuz, where Iranian fast boats conducted high-visibility patrols. European and Asian capitals issued cautious statements urging restraint, but privately expressed frustration at the absence of any viable de-escalation channel. The collapsed hopes left the conflict locked in a cycle of strike and counterstrike with no immediate diplomatic lifeline visible. Trump's very complete war claim meets reality. Tehran rejects talks. Oil markets swing wildly. President Trump described the initial strikes as delivering a very complete blow to Iran's military machine, predicting swift capitulation in early briefings and social media posts. Reality diverged sharply. Iranian missile and drone barrages persisted into the second week, hitting targets across Israel and U.S. regional facilities with accuracy that contradicted claims of decisive degradation. Tehran rejected every diplomatic probe outright, with spokespeople stating repeatedly that discussions would begin only after all attacking aircraft withdrew from Iranian airspace. Supreme Leader Khamenei's representatives emphasized that Iran would not negotiate its sovereignty or security under duress. Oil markets reacted violently. Brent crude surged past $105 per barrel in volatile trading sessions as traders priced in potential disruptions to 20% of global supply through the Strait of Hormuz. Gulf tanker traffic slowed, with several major shippers rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope at tripled insurance costs. Tehran's state broadcaster aired footage of undamaged underground missile depots and mobile launchers repositioning at night, undercutting White House assertions of a crippled adversary. The contrast fueled skepticism among some congressional Republicans and defense analysts who questioned whether the campaign's scope had been adequately stress-tested against Iran's known resilience doctrines. Public messaging from Washington shifted toward emphasizing long-term pressure rather than quick victory, while energy analysts warned of sustained volatility if the impasse continued. From the frantic early bids for peace through Italian mediators to Iran's unyielding vows of resistance, from Trump's pivot to demands for unconditional surrender amid market chaos to Tehran's preparations for ground invasions and control over the war's end, this conflict exposes the fragility of power plays on the global stage. We've seen optimistic timelines shatter, diplomatic doors slam shut, and a resilient adversary turn the tables, forcing a reckoning with prolonged instability, soaring oil prices, and the specter of wider escalation. What started as a calculated strike has evolved into a test of wills, reminding us that in geopolitics, assumptions can be the deadliest weapon. As the strikes continue and both sides dig in, the world watches, wondering if de-escalation is still possible or if this impasse signals a new era of endless confrontation. That's the raw, unfiltered breakdown from Jeff Desk, your go-to source for cutting through the noise on global flashpoints. If this hit home and fired you up to stay ahead of the curve, smash that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and join the thousands uncovering the truths that matter. Drop a comment below. Who's really calling the shots in this war, Washington or Tehran? Let's discuss. See you in the next update.